You can call me heartless if that makes the choice easier to judge. I had spent 18 months taking calls from a woman who treated my career like a hobby, while my husband answered every insult with silence and another small favor for his mother. My boss was turning 60. The next regional director was about to be chosen, and I had built the lunch that would put me in front of every person who mattered. I only promised to meet my husband afterward and ride with him to the burial. When he came to the restaurant in his funeral suit, wet from the rain, I was already at the microphone telling the room he had always been a mama's boy. He took off his glasses, wiped them, and asked me once if I was ready to leave. I was sure 10 more minutes could save my future. My name is Cassidy Monroe. I was 48 then, and I had worked at Ridgeway Mutual for 11 years. My title was Senior Client Relations Manager, which sounded more important than it was. I solved the problem before the client knew there was one, then watched a man with a larger office explain my work at the next meeting. Of course, I was paid well. People always said that when I asked why I had never been promoted. They said I was valued. They said I was essential where I was. Essential is a neat word. It means everyone needs you to keep doing the same work while someone else moves up. Thomas and I had been married for 22 years. He was 56 and ran a repair crew for the city vehicle yard. He could hear a bad wheel bearing from across a parking lot. At home, he showed love the same way. He changed smoke alarm batteries before they chirped. He filled my gas tank on Sunday. If rain was coming, he checked the black umbrella with the wooden handle and put it beside my briefcase. There had been good years. When my father had surgery, Thomas drove 4 hours after a night shift and sat beside me until the doctor came out. He did not give a speech. He brought coffee and kept the nurses' names straight. That was Thomas. Useful. Quiet. Hard to reach. His mother, Evelyn, never admired quiet women or working women. She admired women who worked quietly for a family. The difference mattered to her. At one Christmas dinner, she called my job paid table decoration. Thomas waited until we were in the car before saying she should not have done that. I asked why he had not said it while she could hear him. He took off his glasses, cleaned one lens, and repeated that she should not have done it. That was his answer to conflict. He made a clear statement after the room was empty. Then he repaired something. Evelyn became ill 18 months before she died. I ordered meals, spoke to the pharmacy, and covered 2 clinic visits when Thomas could not leave the city yard. I did my part. I also missed visits. Work came first more than once, and Thomas used to tell his sister that a client crisis had trapped me. Then he stopped doing that. 3 weeks before Evelyn died, I missed a Sunday visit because Martin Shaw had asked me to revise a presentation. Thomas wrote in the family chat that Cassidy had another commitment. No emergency. No kind excuse. Just my words. I told him the message made me sound cold. He removed his glasses and asked what wording would be more accurate. I said he knew exactly what he was doing. He put the glasses back on and returned to packing his mother's meals. I read it as sulking. Thomas had grown tired, and tired men become petty. That was all. Martin's 60th birthday lunch was set for the first Friday in October. It also marked 30 years since he opened Ridgeway's regional office. Clients were coming. Senior managers were flying in. By the end of the month, Martin would recommend the next regional director. I had booked the restaurant, chosen the menu, and written the program. Paige Nolan, our event coordinator, told me the lunch was my best chance to stop being essential and start being visible. I agreed. By dessert, Martin would see who could hold a room. Evelyn died on Tuesday morning. Thomas called while I was reviewing place cards. His voice was even. He said his mother had gone before breakfast and asked if I could come to the care home. I asked whether Beth was there. His sister lived 12 minutes away and had handled most mornings. Thomas said she was on her way, but he wanted me. There was a time when that would have moved me. That morning I looked at the seating plan and counted the names around Martin's table. 9 people. 5 had a say in the promotion. I told Thomas I had a vendor call, then promised to meet him at the funeral home that afternoon. He was sitting beside Evelyn's empty bed when I arrived. Her hearing aid case was still open on the table. Thomas held it in both hands, as if someone might need it again. I put my hand on his shoulder. He covered it with his own. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. It was real. I will not pretend otherwise. Then Beth entered and asked about Friday. The chapel service would begin at 11. Burial was set for 12:30 at Willow Creek Cemetery. My lunch began at 11:30. I explained that it was not a normal birthday. It was a company event with clients, and I had planned it for 4 months. Beth looked at Thomas. He took off his glasses and asked whether I could attend the chapel, leave before the final hymn, and meet him at the restaurant at noon. He would collect me on the way to the cemetery. The restaurant was 6 minutes from the chapel and 14 from Willow Creek. It could work. I said yes. Thomas asked one more thing. He said the funeral director had marked the front pew for family, and he wanted me on his left until we had to leave. His words were plain. No demand. No guilt. I promised. At the office the next morning, Martin came to my desk. He had heard about Evelyn. He told me not to attend the lunch. Paige could manage the room, and he could give my toast notes to someone else. I said I could do both. Martin said that was not a test. He told me to go with my husband and stay there. The order should have settled it. Instead, it annoyed me. Men at his level could say family came first because nobody questioned their place when they left. Women like me left one important room and returned to find our chair occupied. Paige understood. She waited until Martin walked away, then said leaders always remembered who showed up. She also said a short appearance would do no harm. I could welcome the guests, give the toast, and leave at noon. That became my plan. I did not tell Thomas that Martin had released me. I told him Martin needed me for the opening because 2 clients had changed their travel plans. Thomas asked if Martin had used the word need. I said he had made it clear. Thomas removed his glasses. He wiped both lenses with the cloth from his pocket. Then he repeated my answer. Martin had made it clear. I asked why he always had to cross-examine simple things. He said he was trying to understand which promise I intended to keep. That sounded unfair. I had spent months helping with Evelyn. I reminded him of the pharmacy calls and the meals. He said those things mattered. He also said Friday was not a total that could be balanced with older work. Of course, his mother had done no balancing when she was alive. She could insult my job in a room full of people, and he would wait until the car to object. Now I was expected to prove my goodness in front of the same family. I told him Evelyn would not know whether I stood at the chapel. Martin would know whether I stood at his lunch. Thomas held my gaze. Then he repeated the sentence in the same quiet voice. His mother would not know. Martin would. He asked whether that was the answer I wanted him to remember. I said yes, because it was honest. On Friday morning, rain tapped against the bedroom window before the alarm rang. Thomas was already dressed. His black suit was older, but it fit him. He had polished his shoes and placed a clean handkerchief in his pocket. My black dress hung on the closet door. Beside it sat the umbrella with the wooden handle. Thomas had tightened one loose rib the night before. On the dresser lay a cream card from the funeral home. Front PEW. Family was printed in dark blue letters. My name was written on the back in Thomas's block handwriting. I asked why my name was needed when everyone knew who I was. He said the director had made cards for each reserved place. Then he took off his glasses and asked if I was still coming to the chapel. I told him I would meet him at the restaurant at noon. The setup had run late, and going to the chapel first would leave Paige alone with the clients. His face did not change. He picked up the family card and slid it inside the funeral program. He said the service started at 11. I said I knew. He said the car would be outside the restaurant at noon. If I came straight out, we could still reach the burial together. I kissed his cheek. His skin was cold from shaving. He did not turn toward me. The restaurant was called Bellwether House. Its main dining room had a wall of glass facing the valet drive. On warm days, the entrance stood open to the terrace. That Friday, the staff kept one side open because guests were arriving under umbrellas and the floor mats were already soaked. I wore the black dress to the restaurant. At 10:40, I changed in the restroom into a blue suit that Paige had brought. The black dress stayed in a garment bag behind the host stand. Martin arrived at 11:20. I took the umbrella from the valet and held it over him from the curb. He laughed and said he was capable of surviving rain at 60. I told him regional directors protected company assets. He looked at me for a second. Then he reminded me that I should be at the funeral. I said Thomas and I had arranged everything. The chapel was private, and I was meeting him before the burial. That was the second lie. It came more easily because the first one had already made room for it. Martin touched my elbow and said I had 10 minutes. I heard concern, but I chose to read permission. Paige placed me at Martin's right side. The seat gave me a clear view of the door and of every senior manager at the long table. At 11:50, my phone lit with a message from Thomas. The service was over. He was leaving the chapel. I wrote that I was finishing the welcome. At 11:57, he said he would be at the valet in 5 minutes. Paige leaned close and asked if I wanted to cut the toast. The first course had arrived late. If I left before speaking, the vice president from Hartford would never hear the part about my work building the region. I checked the time. A good toast took 4 minutes. Thomas could wait 4 minutes. A server set Martin's small birthday cake between us, one candle burning above the dark icing. Martin leaned close to ask what I had arranged for dessert, and the room was loud enough that our faces ended up only inches apart. I rested my hand on his forearm while I explained the surprise. He smiled and left his arm where it was. Beyond his shoulder, rain moved down the glass in silver lines. A man in a black suit stood under the narrow edge of the entrance roof, holding a folded funeral program against his chest. I recognized Thomas before I could make out his face. He was looking through the window at my hand on Martin's arm. My phone lit again. I turned it face down and removed my hand slowly, as if I had simply finished making my point. I told Paige to bring the microphone. Martin was speaking with a client when I stood. I began with the safe lines. 30 years. Steady leadership. A company that knew how to keep its promises. People smiled. Martin raised his glass. Then I moved to the section I had written for myself. I said a career was built by choosing the room that still had work to do. I said too many women were praised for disappearing into other people's needs. That line earned a few nods. My phone vibrated on the table. Thomas. I pressed the side button without looking down. The microphone made my voice carry through the open entrance and over the valet drive. I could hear the soft echo return from the stone outside. I said my husband could not join us because he was burying his mother. A woman near the end of the table lowered her glass. Martin stopped smiling. I should have ended there. I had a clean path back to the printed toast. Instead, I saw the attention in the room. It was complete. No one was checking a phone. No one was speaking over me. For once, the whole table waited for my next sentence. I said Thomas had always been a mama's boy. Apparently, even death could not make him manage his own schedule. 2 people gave short, unsure laughs. Paige did too, half a beat late. I smiled at Martin and added that some of us chose the living. The music stopped. Martin had reached across the table and pressed the control beside his chair. He stood, but he did not take the microphone at once. His face had gone flat. Beyond him, through the glass, Thomas stood under the edge of the entrance roof. Rain ran from his hair onto the shoulders of his funeral suit. He had no umbrella. One hand held the funeral program. The cream family card showed above it. He had heard me. For 1 second, the room and the drive felt like the same place. Thomas looked at me through the open entrance. He removed his glasses. Water covered both lenses. He wiped them with the handkerchief meant for his mother's funeral. I put the microphone down. Martin asked the room for silence, though no one was speaking. He said he had told me in plain words to miss the lunch and remain with my husband. He said his birthday was not an excuse to mock a man on the day he buried his mother. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. I started to explain that Thomas and I had an arrangement. Martin lifted one hand. He told me the arrangement could be discussed later. My husband was outside. Thomas stepped under the open entrance. Water darkened the carpet beneath his shoes. He looked at the clock over the host stand. It was 12:06. He told me the car was at the curb. If we left at once, we could still make the burial. That was the last clean choice I received. I reached for my bag. Then the Hartford vice president asked whether my comment had been part of the planned program. A client beside him wanted to know if the lunch should continue. Paige whispered that we needed to settle the room before people started leaving. 10 minutes, I thought. Perhaps 12. I could tell Martin I had used poor humor, assure the clients there was no family crisis, and leave with my position intact. I told Thomas to wait in the car. He repeated the words. Wait in the car. I said I would be right there. Thomas put on his glasses. He looked at the family card in his hand, then at the valet clock. He said the cemetery would not hold the burial for my explanation. I told him neither would my career. He nodded once and walked back into the rain. I turned to Martin. My first explanation was that grief had made Thomas sensitive. That failed at once. Martin said the insult had come from me, not from Thomas. My second explanation was that Evelyn and I had a hard history. I described the Christmas remark about my work. A few faces softened, so I kept going. I explained how often Thomas had let his mother come first and how much care I had already given. Martin asked whether any of that changed what he had told me on Wednesday. I said no, but context mattered. He asked Paige to end the program for 15 minutes. Guests stood and moved toward the coffee tables. Nobody came to me. I followed Martin toward the side hall. I said I had been trying to make a point about women and duty. He said I had used his birthday to make my grieving husband small. The clock behind him read 12:18. I still believed I could do both. I asked Martin to tell Thomas that leaving the lunch had taken time because he had stopped the room. Martin stared at me, then said Thomas had already left. I went to the valet desk. The young man searched the hooks and handed me my keys with a paper stub. The time printed across it was 12:21. My car was brought around at 12:24. Willow Creek was 14 minutes away in dry weather. Rain had slowed the road beside the river. I called Thomas twice. Both calls went to voicemail. At 12:31, I called Beth. She answered in a whisper and said the casket was being lowered. I told her I was 6 minutes away. She said not to drive fast. Nothing else. When I reached the cemetery, the chairs under the canopy were empty. A worker was folding the last one. Mud covered the path, and the rain had softened to a fine mist. Thomas stood near the grave with Emma and Beth. I walked toward them, holding the black umbrella over myself. Emma saw me first. She looked at the umbrella, then at her father's wet suit. I said traffic had been bad. Beth asked whether traffic had written my toast too. Thomas lifted one hand before I could answer. He did not defend me. He did not attack his sister either. He simply said they were leaving for the family meal. I asked if I could ride with him. He removed his glasses and cleaned a small mark from one lens. Then he said he had offered me a ride at 12:06. Emma walked away with Beth. Thomas followed them. I stood beside the fresh soil until the cemetery worker asked if I needed help finding my car. At home that evening, the funeral program lay open on the dining table. The cream card had been removed. Thomas had set it flat on a towel because the rain had blurred one edge of the blue word family. Beside it was my valet stub. I asked where he had found it. He said it had fallen from my coat pocket when I entered the family meal. He had read the time. I told him I had tried to leave. Martin stopped the music and forced me to explain in front of clients. Thomas asked how long it took to say that the joke was wrong and walk out. I said it was not that simple. He took off his glasses. He repeated the 4 times I had made it simple. Martin released me on Wednesday. Thomas asked me at home. He called from the chapel. Then he stood in the restaurant and offered me the car. I said he was counting only the choices that made him look abandoned. He asked which choice made him look married. That question was designed to close the conversation. Thomas did that when he knew he had the stronger fact. He used one neat sentence and left me alone with it. I changed tactics. I told him I was sorry the day had hurt him. I offered to fund a memorial notice in Evelyn's name through Ridgeway. I could ask Martin to match it. It would turn a terrible scene into something useful. Thomas looked at the family card. He said I was already trying to make his mother useful to my career again. I told him that was cruel. He said cruelty had been standing 6 feet from him with a microphone while he held my empty place in the front pew. Then his voice changed. Not louder, less guarded. He told me that when the chapel doors opened, he kept expecting to see me run across the parking lot. At the cemetery, he watched the road until the minister began the final prayer. The empty space beside him had become the only thing he could see. His hand stayed on the wet edge of the family card. For a few seconds, I saw the day without Martin, the promotion, or Evelyn's old remarks. Thomas had not asked me to forgive his mother. He had asked me to stand in one place for less than 2 hours. Then I saw the valet stub beside his hand. Evidence. A time printed by a stranger. Thomas had already arranged the table so that his version looked clean. I decided he wanted guilt more than repair. I told him his grief did not erase 20 years of letting Evelyn speak down to me. He said it did not. He should have stopped her in the room, not in the car. He should have understood that quiet support did not feel like support when I had been humiliated in public. That admission should have satisfied me. Instead, it made me angry because he offered it without surrendering the funeral. Thomas said both things could be true. His mother had wounded me. I had chosen to wound him when she could no longer be blamed for it. I called that a polished line. He put his glasses back on and went upstairs. On Saturday, Emma did not answer my call. Paige answered after 4 hours and said the office was receiving questions about the lunch. She did not ask how I was. Martin sent a short note. There would be a meeting Monday morning with Renee from Human Resources. He wanted an accurate account of the event and of the instruction he had given me before it. Accurate account. That was my work. By noon, I had drafted one. I removed the words joke and mama's boy. I described the toast as an unplanned reference to a private family strain. I wrote that Thomas and I had agreed I would make a necessary appearance before joining the burial. The sentence was close enough to true if the promise at noon was treated as an agreement. I added that Martin's public interruption had made a private issue more visible than it needed to be. Then I deleted his name and changed the line to management response. Cleaner. Thomas came downstairs while I was printing it. He had packed a work bag and one small case. I asked where he was going. He said he would stay at Evelyn's house for a few nights. Beth had left food there, and someone needed to check the pipes. Of course, there were always pipes when Thomas wanted to avoid a conversation. I showed him the statement. He read it once. At the sentence about our agreement, he removed his glasses. He asked when he had agreed that I should miss the chapel. I said the document did not say that. It said I would make an appearance before the burial. He asked when he had agreed that I should remain after he arrived. I said nobody was debating minutes. He touched the valet stub with one finger. 12:21. I told him a marriage could not be reduced to a printed time. He said a promise sometimes could. Before leaving, he placed the family card on top of the statement. The wet edge had dried into a pale wave. He did not take the black umbrella. It remained open near the back door, with 2 small pieces of gold confetti stuck to the fabric. On Sunday, Beth sent me one message. She said Thomas had spent years explaining my absences in the kindest possible way. She would not do it for him now. I called that family loyalty. She did not reply. At work Monday, Paige sat at a different desk. She said Renee needed the small conference room and had moved her for the morning. Her eyes remained on her laptop. Martin entered without stopping at my office. The Hartford vice president had already flown home. 2 clients had sent polite notes asking not to be listed as sponsors of the lunch. There was no public scandal. That almost made it worse. Nobody had to announce what they thought. Renee read my statement and asked one question. Had Martin told me to attend the funeral instead of the lunch? I said he had released me, but a release from a senior leader was not always a real release. Martin said it had been real. I explained the pressure around the promotion. He said no promotion decision had been tied to attendance at his birthday. I asked whether he could honestly say visibility never mattered. He did not answer at once. That pause was the one honest part of the meeting. Visibility did matter. Everyone knew it. Renee said the next question was whether my husband had agreed with my choice. I told her Thomas was grieving and saw the timing differently. I offered to bring him in once he was calmer. Renee said the meeting would remain open until Thursday. That gave me 3 days. I called Thomas from the parking lot. He answered on the 4th ring. I asked him to attend one short meeting and confirm that he had planned to collect me before the burial. Nothing more. He said that was true. I asked him to confirm that my attendance at the lunch had been discussed between us. He said that was also true. The relief in my body came so fast that I laughed. I told him this did not need to destroy either my career or our marriage. Thomas asked what else I wanted him to say. I told him to explain that Evelyn and I had a strained bond, that I had already provided months of help, and that he understood why the lunch mattered. He removed his glasses. I could tell from the small sound of the frame touching the table at his end of the call. Then he repeated my request in plain words. I wanted him to tell my employer that he supported my choice. I said I wanted him to behave like a husband. Thomas said a husband was the person I had asked to wait in the car while I repaired a joke about his dead mother. I told him not to use that tone. He said he had not changed his tone in 22 years. That, finally, was the true thing I could use against him. I told him his mother had insulted me in our home, at family dinners, and once in front of Emma. Every time, he had waited until we were alone to say she was wrong. He had made me carry the public shame and offered private agreement as payment. He could not now act surprised that I had stopped treating her needs as sacred. Thomas did not refute it. He said I was right about him. He had been a coward with conflict, and he had called it keeping peace. The words sat between us. Then he said his failure did not put the microphone in my hand and did not keep me in the restaurant after he arrived. I told him we could repair both things if he came Thursday. He gave me one condition. I would withdraw my written statement, tell Martin that he had released me, and admit that Thomas had asked me to leave at 12:06. After that, he would sit with me and discuss what remained of the marriage. I refused. Removing the statement would make me look dishonest. Thomas said changing a false statement did not create the dishonesty. I ended the call. That evening, I sent Renee a revised version instead. It said Thomas had been overwhelmed by grief and had misunderstood how quickly I could leave. It also said Martin's sudden stop to the lunch had required me to remain and manage client concern. I copied Martin. Then I asked Paige to confirm that I had tried to leave. Her message showed as read. No reply came. On Wednesday, Thomas returned for more clothes. The black umbrella had dried beside the door. He closed it, fastened the strap, and placed it next to my briefcase. I told him the Thursday meeting was at 9. He said he would come. I asked whether he had accepted that my job should not be lost over one bad sentence. He removed his glasses and said he would tell the room exactly what happened. That was enough. Martin had heard only the ugly middle. Renee had seen only the careful reports. Thomas could give them the long marriage around it. He could explain Evelyn. He could admit his part. Once the facts were balanced, my decision would look human instead of cruel. I spent Wednesday night preparing the order in which he should speak. First, the strain with Evelyn. Then, the months of care. Then, our plan to meet. The toast could come last, reduced to one bad line after years of pressure. By midnight, the story finally made sense again. Thomas arrived at Ridgeway at 8:58 on Thursday. Rain dotted the shoulders of his work coat. He carried no case. In one hand were the Cream family card and the valet stub. I met him in the lobby and told him papers would make the meeting feel hostile. He said they were not papers. They were the two places I had promised to be. I asked him to let me lead. He took off his glasses and cleaned them while we waited for the elevator. Then he said he would answer the questions he was asked. The conference room held 4 chairs. Renee sat at one end. Martin sat beside her. A 5th chair against the wall was empty. I had expected Paige. I began with the marriage. I spoke about Evelyn's remarks and Thomas's silence. He did not interrupt. I described the care I had provided and the importance of the lunch. Martin looked down at the table when I mentioned the promotion. Renee asked Thomas whether he and I had agreed that I would attend the lunch. Thomas said we had agreed I would attend the chapel, then meet him at noon and ride to the burial. I moved my pen across the same line on my pad twice. Renee asked whether I had attended the chapel. He said no. Martin asked whether Thomas knew I had been released from the lunch. Thomas looked at me. He removed his glasses. This time he did not clean them. He folded the arms and placed them beside the family card. He said I had told him Martin needed me because clients had changed their travel plans. Martin stated that no client had made such a request. He had told me to stay with my husband. I said senior leaders often gave polite permission while expecting commitment. Martin answered that he had used plain words because he did not want any employee choosing his birthday over a funeral. Renee asked what happened when Thomas reached the restaurant. Thomas slid the family card into the center of the table. The blue word was still blurred along one edge. He said he heard my toast from the open entrance. He came inside at 12:06 and told me the car was ready. He told me we could still reach the burial if we left at once. Renee asked what I did. Thomas slid the valet stub beside the card. 12:21. My pen stopped on the page. I said Martin had stopped the event, and the clients needed direction. Martin replied that he had told me to go to my husband. He had paused the lunch so I could leave, not so I could defend myself. I tried the larger truth. I spoke about years of being placed second to Evelyn. Thomas said that part was true. He had failed me whenever his mother spoke badly, and he waited until later to object. For a moment, the room softened. Then he said he had spent years giving my choices softer names. He had told Emma I was trapped at work. He had told Beth I was tired. He had told Evelyn not to take my absence personally. He had done it because he thought protecting my place in the family was part of being my husband. I looked at the empty 5th chair. Thomas said he was not doing it again. That was what I had mistaken in the family chat, at the dining table and on the phone. His exact words were not a trap. They were the end of translation. He had stopped turning another commitment into an emergency. He had stopped turning a choice into pressure. He had stopped turning my lie into a hard day. I told Renee that Thomas had not filed any complaint with Ridgeway and that our marriage should not decide my career. She said Thomas had not brought the matter into that room. I had brought him and asked the company to accept his account. There was no answer that improved that fact. Martin closed my statement. He said I would keep my current role, but my name would not go forward for regional director. The choice was not punishment for missing a funeral. It was based on the false account I had asked 2 other people to support. He handed the event schedule to Renee and said Lena would manage future executive lunches. Then he left before I did. Thomas put on his glasses. I asked if losing the promotion was enough for him. He said he had not come for my promotion. He had come to answer one final request honestly. Then he told me he had buried his mother without me. He could survive that. He would not remain married to someone who made his grief useful and then asked him to certify the lie. The petition for dissolution arrived the next week, with one mediation date and no other message. Thomas moved into Evelyn's small house until our home could be sold. Without the new salary, I paid the mortgage from the account that had once covered travel. Emma met her father for Sunday lunch and stopped answering my invitations. Martin kept every exchange with me short and gave Lena the seat I had expected. At Ridgeway, I kept my title, but nobody asked me to write another speech. I had thought the living were the people who could still promote me, praise me, or make space when I entered a room. Thomas had seemed tied to a dead woman and an old duty. Yet he had been the one keeping my better version alive for years. Once he stopped speaking for me, my own words did the work. The cream front PEW, family card and the 1221 valet stub remained side by side on the conference table. Thomas walked across the wet parking lot with empty hands, and the black umbrella stayed beside my chair.